Hello and welcome along again to the Outdoor Gibbon podcast. Again, it's a slightly different format as this show was recorded at the Stalking Show 2025 for the BDS. This was the second panel to run, and they were on Sunday, April the 13th between 1 and 2, and it was the Big Venison Delusion. Could venison ever go mainstream? The topic was, despite venison being ethical and sustainable credentials, venison remains a niche product. The panel investigates the opportunities and the barriers to bringing venison to the mass market. Can we overcome the misconception about the accessibility and versatility? The panel was made up of Jose Soto, a professional stalker, chef, author and lecturer; Tristan Kirk, director of Lincolnshire Game; Nick Ware, the communities facilitator of the Open Food Network; David Hooten, representing the British Quality Wild Venison; Nick Rout, British Deer Society and an independent registered food business and representative; and finally Simon Gibson, CEO of Celtic Manor. I must apologise again for the audio quality. At some points I will drop in a sort of an overview because I think some questions were asked in the audience and the audience member didn't have a microphone, so you'll get me come in a few times with their questions, but hopefully have a good listen, and if it raises any questions we'll tell you how to get in touch at the end.
Group. So we have 7 hotels in the group, including the Celtic Manor, which many of you may know, in South Wales, the International Convention Centre, and 15 restaurants. So that equates to 150 chefs, and we buy £9 million of food a year. So I'm sitting here really in the guise of a buyer. So my participation on the panel today will be to talk about what concerns us as buyers and how do we reach scale so that we can provide food for, say, a typical convention centre dinner where there's 2,000 diners. And is that possible to do that on a regular basis with venison? So hopefully I can help the discussion along.
Hello, I'm Nick Rout. That's weird, that noise behind you, isn't it? I'm Nick Rout. I'm Head of Education and Training for the British Deer Society, so I look at how we train people in supplying game meat hygienically and safely. I'm also a small food business in my own right. I've got my own business which I registered to supply locally, and I also sit on the working group that comes together and helps advise the Food Standards Agency as to how to do things, or we try to advise the Food Standards Agency how to do things.
Thank you. I'm David Hooten. I'm the Forestry Commission East and East Midlands Deer Officer. I had an interest in wild venison for many years now. I helped chair the East of England Wild Venison Project back 2010-2014, and currently I'm very involved in the British Quality Wild Venison Standard. The standards are designed to help and support the food sector.
Hello, I'm Tristan Kirk, Director of Lincolnshire Game Limited. We supply retail across the UK and we export abroad venison and game birds.
Hi, I'm Jose. God, this is loud. I'm Jose Soto. I'm Senior Chef Lecturer at Westminster Kingsway College. Game chef, I suppose, and basically doing all the demos and the other side. Stalker. Sort of lifetime bought into the whole of this industry and have a great passion for it. Unlike a lot of other chefs, I'm very different in the fact that basically it makes me no more money whether I sell 1 venison steak or 10 venison steaks. My thing has always been about education, educating the chefs of tomorrow about how to use stuff, and also the general public, and help everybody.
Hello, I'm Nick Ware. I'm part of the Open Food Network, which is an organisation trying to build short food supply chains, getting the food direct from the people who are producing it to the people who are eating it. I'm here as part of the Wild Venison Network, which is a joint venture between the Open Food Network and the BDS. And what we're trying to do is to create a map and a directory with anybody who has venison for sale, and then promote that directory to the mainstream, whether that's schools, hospitals, supermarkets, whoever.
And just on that, hopefully you've all seen there's a QR code, and it's brilliant. You can register on the Wild Venison Network. Doesn't cost you anything, but I do think this is one of the solutions of the myriad of solutions that we're going to have to provide collectively to help us sell more venison. But I think just to sort of set the tone, and Tristan, I'm going to pick on you for the first question, but as the only AGHE rep on our panel, and I'm sure you know what's coming next, we all sit here producing venison and then complaining. I think it'd be great to hear from your side why our prices, as we say, too low. What's the reality?
Okay, so I'm probably not going to be the most popular person on here, but just from our point of view, obviously we have to deal with a lot of different quality of venison that comes through the door. We have to collect it from chillers in our own vehicles, which is incredibly expensive. And we do a lot of mileage all over the country. Oh, sorry, is that better? Yeah. And then, so collecting with our own vehicles from all over the country, from everybody's chillers, which makes us not competitive with the likes of cattle and things like that, where you can fill an articulated lorry and send it from one end of the country to the other for probably the same price as we can send 2 vans to pick up 20% or 10% of an articulated lorry's worth. We have not an awful lot of wastage. We try not to get as much wastage as possible, but we can't sell the skins, which you can with the cattle. We can't sell hard bones particularly. So we do have wastage there. And then, of course, there's the shop points, which is part of the wastage. And inevitably, there's only so much somebody will pay for venison at the other end of the scale. So as much as we can try and hike our prices into the stores to try and get a better price for a stalker, eventually you reach that limit and then you won't be able to sell it.
Thanks, Tristan. Hopefully that answers a question that I'm sure lots of people ask. We'll do questions. There is going to be questions at the end. Give you time. Jose, a question for you. Are you seeing from the chefs you're training, is there an understanding from them of the benefits of venison and game? I think if it works, yeah. And are you seeing the ones that you have trained going out into their careers using more game because they understand the benefits of it?
Yes, and that's the light of it. I mean, if you look at sort of some of the guys. I mean, some of the guys that I've trained have been on things like Great British Menu. You've seen venison on there. Some of the guys that I've trained have been on MasterChef and stuff like that. If you look at the things like the Craft Guild of Chefs, not last year, but the year before, venison was the main course on the National Chef of the Year. For the graduate awards, I set the task of basically the butchery breaking down of a haunch of venison for that. So, and what I've tried to do is over the last, I mean, I've been now where I am, it frightens me to say, but 20 years there. And in those 20 years, what I've tried to do with the help of Simon and Tristan from Lincolnshire Game is we've tried to position gamey venison as a meat that all of our students understand. And we did that right at the beginning of the third years, and where every single one of my third years has development class. And it's pretty much a mini deer stalking certificate. And right through from the animal, the shot placement, what happens, the bleeding, everything, right? All of that basically set in. And sorry about feedback from that. So what we've tried to do that, and I've done that for 20 years with the help of these guys, you know. And these guys are doing it off their own back, basically helping me out to do that. I convinced my college to buy a deer larder. I am the only college in the UK, catering college in the UK, that has its own deer larder. We put 15 to 20 animals through that deer larder every year. That might not sound like a lot, but for a catering college it is, because basically there is no other catering college in the UK that's doing that. And all of these guys that are in that 20 years, we had sort of 80 to 90 of these third years that are going out with a mass knowledge of venison. So basically venison and game birds, you know, and being put in on the menus, starting to work with it. with venison now, what we've done, we've gone to the extent where our first years use it. So basically you have a 3-year course. The first, second and third years use it. First years use it in one of their synoptic exams. So I've placed it as that. I've written the exams for them. I've done all of the theory for them so they understand what a deer is, as basic as that. In the second year, they start to understand about different species. In the third year, they have that mini DCS, which I do with them. So what we've tried to do is position venison as the fourth meat. And that's been with these guys' help, to be able to do that. And we over the years, we've had lots and lots of students that have then gone in to using venison, breaking down their own carcasses and working with venison, putting it onto plates, and using like that. So there is an uptake. There is an uptake on it.
And I mean, just sort of following on from that, I mean, Simon, as a buyer of venison, and maybe as an employer of some of Jose's students, be interesting to hear your views.
Jose's been doing a fantastic job raising awareness. But I think where we need a little help, Jose, is you training the trainers, not just the chefs.
Yep.
There's far too few culinary colleges doing what you're doing. So if we could get more of you scattered around the country.
Well, if I can just answer that. So basically last year, what we tried to do is we do 2 game seminars a year where we invite anybody. Anyone, could be stalkers, it could be chefs. A lot of the chefs use it for their CPD with us. And we do these seminars where in the first half in the morning, again, sponsored by Simon and Tristan, they've done it for 20 years. In the first half of the morning, we cover all of the game birds and the preparation of game birds and their background, history, portions, preparation, everything. Then we have a lunch downstairs, which is basically also sponsored by them and includes a 3-course meal. And then they come back up and I've got one of each deer species hanging, right? So they can see a deer species. And I go through each of the deer species with given their background, as well as doing, again, a mini deer stalking certificate there, explaining everything to them. And then I break down a whole carcass. Now, last year, we did offer with Bass, basically, because they're doing this, they do this competition, basically, it's a canopy competition for the E-Game Awards. So what I said to Bass is what we'll do is if I will offer you 3 places for lecturers from around the country, all you need to do is help them get here. And I think the message got a bit missed because we didn't end up with as many lecturers there as we could have done. And a few of the lecturers didn't know that Bass was going to pay for their travel. And so I think we missed a chance there. And I'm perfectly prepared to work with anybody to do that again, to make that offer, to do it for free for them, to get those guys in, to learn about what we're doing, to see how we've positioned what we've done. I'm even prepared to basically do a whole day seminar just for lecturers, explaining what we've done, how we've done it, so they can input it into their own places. Because we use Simon Tristan a lot, but out in other places, other parts of the country, they'll have game dealers that they can work with as well, and stalkers, as you said, in your network, which they can deal with. Now, but what these guys need to remember, these are an educational facility. You've got to understand, right? Look at the deer that you're sending in, right? It's not all about headshot stuff, right? Because basically you cannot send a deer in shot in the head, basically for an educational thing. Number one, it'll terrify the kids because basically they look and go, geez, what happened to that? We understand all of that, but they don't. So you just got to look at the way that you send it in so that they basically have a great experience and a great story, a background and the provenance of that product to then be able to say, oh God, this is great. I need to use this. And the reasons why.
I love the idea of the 4th meat, because if you have a convention customer, like a large corporate or government agency come and they want to set up a big conference, thousands of people attend, there's always 3 choices. And you know what they are? They're chicken, they're beef, and they're lamb. And pork's never served for obvious reasons. There's all sorts of difficulties with that. And fish is awkward. But venison could be a really great 4th product. What our executive team told me they needed was, and we can talk about whether this is even possible, they want quality. They want traceability. They want quantity. And what they mean by that is consistent supply. It's no good ringing up one week and you've got a big conference coming in and you've persuaded the client that you're going to serve venison to 3,000 people, and then everyone says they've got no venison in the supply chain. That's a disaster. And, the other issue is the chefs are nervous. I can tell you that. They're nervous about traceability. They're nervous about what happens between the shop point and getting to the dealer. How long has that carcass been on the ground? Has it been dragged? Has it been hung on a fence for a couple of hours? Because for a chef, that's absolutely never going to hit a plate. We can supply venison all day long. But if there's something wrong with that venison, you're not going to get sued. We're going to get sued.
Well,
And
if
so-
I can just sort of answer that, and I'm going to hand over to Tristan as well with this, because Tristan will basically give you the background on it. With those customers that are worried about that, there are 3 game dealers in the UK that have BRC accreditations basically for supplying for retailers. So Linkage Game is one of them, Highland Game is the other one, and the other one's Ben Rimpey. When it comes to retail, Ben's not really interested in doing retail. He sees them as a pay, right? And now the other 2 guys basically work with them. They're used to working with them, and they've worked with supermarkets. When you're supplying people like Waitrose and Marks and Spencer's, your guys don't need to worry, because they're basically what they want from you is sort of quite difficult, isn't it, Tristan? I mean, I'll hand over to Tristan to explain it. But
Yeah, absolutely. So just to get BRC itself costs us a fortune. We have to fully maintain it all year round. Obviously, anybody can walk through your door at any time and want to audit absolutely everything that you've got in your factory, from your staff to where your knives were made to what you've got in your chiller. And that is just the starting point before you can actually supply retail. So the M&S will have their own set of standards, which are above and beyond BRC. And then Waitrose will have another set of standards, which will be slightly different from Marks and Spencer's. And we obviously have to maintain all of those at all times. And traceability, of course, is a massive part of that, as in cross-contamination, all of the hygiene rules and everything. So I'm confident out of our factory, we can supply anybody.
I have you guarantee from the shop, please. Is it getting it to, sorry, I was just going to say, how do you guarantee from the shop placement and the beast going down to getting it to you that carcass has been properly handled?
Well, I mean, it's an inspection process when it arrives on site, and we collect everything directly from estate chillers in our own estate, in our own chilled vehicles. Our guys are trained to check a carcass when they collect it in the first place. We have a full traceability system, which we use from that point. We check temperatures all the way through the call chain. So, we get it all the way back, and you can tell. And there are certain things that will be rejected for retail, but it doesn't mean we can't use them somewhere else. But obviously, each time you do that, you're adding in cost.
I think this is quite a good juncture to turn to you, David, and I think you know what I'm going to ask you about, which is the British Quality Wild Venison Assurance Scheme. But I think, this is a solution that a lot of people have fed into. I think the aims of it are laudable. It's going to require all of us to buy into it and support it. But I think just a moment for you to talk about it, David, would be interesting to hear.
Yeah, thank you. So, British Quality Wild Venison was set up way back. Well, I say way back. It was in July 2020. It's in that early COVID period, and the food sector and the deer sector were sort of miles apart. All the game dealers were shutting the doors, and it was about how we increase the supply of British wild venison into that catering supply chain or into that bigger market. And we didn't really know what that bigger market was. But what we did know was that periodically, and we've all been there, the game dealers didn't need the carcasses because their bigger marketplace wasn't big enough. As we're going forward, we need to be culling a lot more deer. There's no question about that. There's a lot of small species and there's a lot of large species. And really, I think the market's split into 2 places. The small species are hard to handle, small returns on the volume of carcass. So there's a market for that. The second market is the larger species, which as game dealers do want, because they're easier to convert into volumes of meat. The bit you identified, Simon, about what happens from point of shot to ending up in the AGHE, that is the bit that we've highlighted and was highlighted to us as the weak point in everything we do. What we should all be doing is treating this product as food from just before we squeeze that trigger to when it leaves our premises. And there's a lot of cases out there where we all see the failings. There's also some really high quality venison out there being produced by guys who have got all the processes, all the procedures in place. So we mustn't undermine that. But what we need to do is identify where the gaps were. The initial gaps are where you shoot it, the extraction process, and how quickly it enters the cold chain. The cold chain, the chiller, if you're supplying AGHE and anyone else, should be registered as a food business with the local authority. Now, we all know that there's some challenges around that, but it's a very simple, straightforward process. The second point is how it gets from that chiller to the AGHE. And these are the bits that scare properly the food sector. So I was with Exeter University a couple of weeks ago with David Macaulay, and they wanted to use British wild venison, but they didn't trust the bit from point of shot to the AGHE. The AGHE is going to have all the checks in place. So we've developed, in partnership with British Deer Society, Basque, the NGO, the AGHEs, and some of the buyers, to develop the British Quality Wild Venison standard. Yes, it's another red tractor. Yes, it's another audit process. But at the moment, there is no one checking the bit between point of shot and it end up in AGHE. Nothing's audited. Nothing that we can go to a caterer and say, this is what happens. We can say this is what should happen, but no one's checking the process. So there's what we call BQWV, is that audited supply chain. Is an auditor going out and checking that the stalkers are qualified, they are trained hunters, that they inspect those carcasses. They look at the extraction equipment available. They talk to the stalkers on the ground and say, what processes do you follow? What are your cleaning regimes for that quad bike, for that trailer, for the truck? And when we open the back of the truck up and have a look on the inside, what do we see? Do we see the petrol can, the spade, the bag of dog food, the pheasant feed? Or do we see a nice clean back of the truck with a nice blood tray in it, or a drag tray that can be kept clean before it enters off that chiller? That's what we're looking for. We're looking for those standards. And it's an annual audit. And yes, I know it's going to cost you money. So if you're only doing a few deer a year, it's not going to make economic sense. But if we want deer to go into that supply chain in volume and supply the caterers, supply these big corporate events where we can move volume, we can provide a consistent product, we need to put those checks in place. And that's what the BQWV scheme's about. And love it or hate it, it's here. And if you want to sell your deer in volume to the catering trade through the AGHEs and get a consistent price, I'm not going to say it's going to be a great price, it's going to be at the price point that works. And if we actually look at a business, we know what those costs are. We know that the transport costs are high. We know that the processing costs are high. We know that we have a skilled labour shortage in the processing plant, so we need to pay the right price there. Plants are expensive to run. Freezers are expensive to run. Ben Rigby's just invested 1.8 million in a big new freezer unit to support the sector. Yes, he'll make money out of it, but he can only pay the price points at work. So I think there's a lot going forward that we've got, can be positive about. There is a market out there. There's both a local market for the local guys who are supplying locally under Hunter's exemption through registered food businesses into that local marketplace. And there's a big marketplace out there that we haven't captured yet that we really should be looking at. But for that, we have to reach the standards they expect us to reach. And
there's a culinary Olympics that's held every year. How many years? You know, the international one?
It's every year, isn't it?
Is it every year?
KTRC, yeah.
Well, the Welsh national team said to me, like, we can't keep serving up Welsh lamb or beef. And I said to them, do something different. So Nick and, in fact, I think you helped out. And we decided to go with muntjac. I think you were a judge. Do you judge that?
Well, I've helped the Culinary Olympics guys basically at Reesby Estate, because I shoot on Reesby Estate.
Oh, okay.
And I've taken the guys stalking, and then basically I took them on a range and everything, and basically explained the whole process. I took some of the chefs out stalking to basically understand the whole process of it. Yeah.
Well, they did muntjac 3 ways, and when you consider they're up against all the other nations of the world, and there's some fine culinary dishes, they came home with a silver medal. And that just goes to show. Most of those judges, by the way, never eaten muntjac before, ever.
I think that there is also this point that that's been highlighted from these conversations, which is that we can get rid, wrong word, but we can move most cases the large species, but it's what do we do with the smaller species? And I think this is going to be the really interesting, because I'm already hearing stories of Chinese water deer, muntjac, getting buried, or should we actually just be leaving them lying on the ground? And that to me is like total capitulation. And we just, if we can, we've got to do everything we can to avoid doing that. And I think it'd be interesting to hear, from Nick, just, actually, is this a solution? What do you do with your muntjac?
Well, my muntjac are being sold, if I sell them to a game dealer, if they're clean shot or headshot, I get 50 pence a kilo. So a 10 kilo muntjac is bringing me a return of £5, which isn't really paying for the ammunition or the tag or anything else that's involved with it. If I just take that muntjac, and I'm a small business, I register the food business, I can process at my home. I can break that muntjac down, turn it into mince. I can sell it to my local pub, who turn it into burgers and sell it as muntjac burgers, where the clientele are actually asking for muntjac. That's a little deer I see in my garden, and they are what we call spite eating. So they are literally ordering their burgers because they're getting revenge on the little deer that's eating all their flowers. So it's a marketplace in its own right, just because of that mentality. We probably should talk now to Nick Weir, who's got the Open Food Network, as how he's going to fit into that, helping people like myself as a small business to move that forward.
Can I just say we do pay £1 a kilo for muntjac and Chinese water deer, and we have a good market.
We'll talk.
Okay, so the little green flyer that you've got on your chair, that's got a QR code on it. We are encouraging anybody who has venison for sale in whatever scale, carcass, pieces, burgers, to register on that map. Once you're on that map, we will be promoting that map. We'll be pushing that out there, getting people to see it. And individual shoppers will find you on that map, and they will contact you and they will ask you what you've got available and what price. That service that we're offering, recording you and putting you on the map, is completely free. We want as many of you on there as possible. The more people are on that map, the more powerful that map is, the more useful it is to the shoppers and the buyers. So we're not charging at all for you to do that. If you then want to go to the next step and actually start to sell that meat and offer it, if you're able to butcher it yourself, or if you want to sell whole carcasses, you can set up your own online shopfront using the Open Food Network. It's got all the functionality there to take online payments, to issue invoices, to process orders, to deal with the whole of the e-commerce bit of that process. If you decide to do that, we will then ask you for 2.4% of everything that you sell, and we invoice that in arrears at the end of each month. The other option, as well as doing both of those things, is that already there are hundreds of shops on the Open Food Network already. We've been trading for 18 years, where there's about 230 shops across the UK. And those shops may well be interested in putting your venison on their shop front. So they'll be selling vegetables, meat, poultry, beer, bread already on those shops. Many of them are very interested in getting wild venison into those online shop fronts. So the other option, as well as having just your own registration on the map for free, or having your own shop, is you can also sell it through the existing shops. And those shops will do a deal with you. You will set your price for your venison. They will then add a markup on top of that price to cover their running costs. We won't make any money out of that, but we will then charge the shop that then sells it on for you. So there's a network out there. It's an established network. At the moment, there's very few stalkers in there. And the reason I'm here this weekend is because I want more stalkers on there, which is why we're asking you to click on the QR code on here and fill that in. The way those shops work is all managed locally. They will each have their own ways of managing how they sell that venison, who they sell it to.
Great, thanks, Nick. I think and I think just to reiterate, the critical part of that is if we're going to be using things like the Wild Venison Network, is quality of the product, and it's got to run through everything we do. And it's what I hear time and again from everyone involved, whether it's from AGHEs, people receiving products or wanting to buy products, is quality. And I think that's where we should all, as a sector, not be afraid to keep lifting standards, go for training, improve training, because it's going to benefit all of us in the end, which means we're going to be able to sell our venison. So I think the other question I was going to ask Tristan is, David, you've talked about it, we need to cull more deer. We definitely do. But is there capacity in the AGHEs for an increased deer cull? What is constraining capacity, or could you take more? It sounds like you're about to get overwhelmed with muntjac, but
well, no, we won't become overwhelmed, and I don't think we've never ever said no to anybody that wants to bring us venison, unless obviously there's been a problem with their facilities. We always seem to find a market. Don't get me wrong. We've been searching for a lot of loins. I think a lot of people have got a lot of haunches. We have a problem with carcass utilisation across the board. But, with a bit of hard work, we do tend to get there in the end. And it is the safest way. I think venison needs to come through a AGHE, because the FSA aren't going to go to everybody's individual chillers and stamp a venison safe for human consumption just from a stalker. So although you need the schemes where potentially, it's going to get into the market that way, for us, it's a little bit terrifying, because we're the ones with something to lose if there is a problem, which ends up in the press or something like that, that's not actually gone through what I would call the correct channels. But that's a matter of opinion. But yeah, market-wise, so a few years ago, we wrote a contract with Marks and Spencer's, where we was going to supply 5 lines into them. We spent an awful lot of money on the factory to make a BRC approved venison side, and went through all of their audit controls, designed the labels, and then 1 month before we were about to launch, they pulled the plug because they decided to use farmed venison. So at that point, we'd already aligned ourselves with a lot of people to get a lot of venison in, and yeah, we end up filling the freezers, but eventually you find a home for it. But it's just another one of those challenges which doesn't help the price to the stalker as well.
And I mean, this is a sort of question, could be quite a controversial question, but is the reality, when you look at what venison prices have done, and as the market currently says, do we just have to accept, rather than continuing to complain about venison prices as the producers of that venison, that actually you can't look on venison as something that's going to make you money? I mean, as things currently stand.
From my point of view, we always really do our best to pay as much as we could possibly pay to try and make sure that consistency is correct and the quality that we get through the door is correct. And then, trying to balance it out. I mean, I'm a director of Lincolnshire Game. I'm actually the financial director of Lincolnshire Game. So I tend to look at it and cry a lot at the best of times. So just, but we genuinely do feel at the moment we're paying a very fair price for what we're ending up with in the end and where we can sell it at. And the only way you can sell it, the only way you could eventually increase that is to make it a more premium product and forget about trying to normalize it and doing the hard work of the hard sell that this is a luxury item, because guess what, it should be, because it is actually.
Yeah, I think you may get differing views on that one. I mean, it's no doubt it's a great product, but actually if we're going to actually sell the venison we need to cull, it can't be a luxury product, because there isn't the outlet for it.
No, but if you want a better price for it, that's the only option.
Yeah, right. Well, I think this is probably a moment to throw it open to the floor for anyone who has questions.
Thank you very much. It seems to me that we're talking about 2 separate markets, not just in terms of big deer and small deer, but you've got the big numbers going into retail, hotels, restaurants, you've got the small numbers going on to the local market, if you will. It seems to me that the market for the big guys is quite well established. It's fairly consistent. If the stalker is doing their bit, there's a market for it through the game dealers. But the local market, to me, seems quite suppressed. Probably that might be local to me. I don't know. How I'm wondering your buyers, whether they're more local or more rural, and how do we boost their numbers?
Yes, they are definitely more local. So all of the shops that are on the Open Food Network already are serving their local communities, either local individual households or business to business, selling to cafes, restaurants, and more recently selling into the public sector, but all as local as possible. Some of them, yes, are very rural. Some are very urban. Some in central Birmingham, central London. They vary dramatically, and the management of that is very much at that local level. So we have certain standards that we impose nationally, and certainly venison is all going through the BDS scheme, and there is a process there when you fill in this form of checking that you are registered with local hygiene and so on. But the promotion of that is done at a local level. So we offer a whole range of software support in terms of taking payments, taking orders, managing all of the order processing, but we also offer a lot of marketing resources. So we do social media training with all of our hubs. We encourage them to do newsletters. We encourage them to tell the story of where does that food come from. So we're very interested in individual stalkers talking about, their practices and how they work, and building a relationship, building loyal customer relationships at a local level between the local stalker and the local buyers and shoppers. Yeah.
I think actually on that one as well, I think the local markets are actually strong, but it's like marketing any product. You need to know your market, and you need to go out there and sell it. And if you go and talk to people at work or at the sports club or wherever else you do in your spare time, you will find people that want the product, but they don't know where to find it. And there's a massive hole there that local production can fill. I think the national thing is much bigger. And if we're going to get food into your sector, it needs a different sort of setup. It really does. And I would love to get more muntjac going through the big HGAGs so that we got a better volume. But we do need consistency of product. And I think it's that sort of bigger end where we're slightly struggling a little bit.
Hey, but just to stir the pot a bit, how do you propose to monitor what I'm doing in a 1,000-acre forest in Scotland at 6 a.m. on a November morning? Secondly, how do you monitor the guy in New Zealand? And do you get New Zealand venison for 50p a kilo?
I can probably help on that. We go out of our way to train the stalkers how to do things right. There has to be a level of responsibility and pride in what we do as stalkers. So that we are actually I'm really proud when I look at a deer hanging up in my chiller, because they're all looking uniform, they're all clean, they're all well shot, there's no contamination. But it's my pride and making sure I do a good job, which is the only thing we can rely on, because you cannot have somebody in the field with you looking at what you're doing. What David's saying is that he makes sure the equipment that you're using to go between the point of shot and the chiller is the right sort of equipment. You're not using the dirty, filthy back of a truck. And this is one of the problems that I see, is that we look at the social media, we look at some of the posts that some people put up, and they're dragging a big red stag into the back of their pickup, which is full up of straw where the dog normally sleeps. Now, clearly that sort of thing, when you're a buyer and you go onto the internet, you look at that standard of handling, that kind of thing would stop any buyer from ever buying venison. So David's looking at what you use, in his scheme, it looks at the way forward, it looks at how you're transporting it, in much the same way as the local authorities, when they're checking the local buyers, they also want to inspect your vehicle. They want to see how you're transporting carcasses. If you want to be horrible with a carcass between point of shot and getting it to the larder, that eventually will fall down because somebody's going to find feces inside it, whatever it might be. So we have to take a bit of responsibility and pride for our own products. How do I monitor and use it? Well, that's farmed. So if it's farmed, it's gone to an abattoir. It's been checked every way through.
We're only dealing wild venison, so I've never bought anything from New Zealand. Ever. We leave that to some of the other guys. So I couldn't tell you.
On the standards thing.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's far too much, personally.
But I think there's also space for all sorts of different venison in the marketplace. I think there's probably a space for New Zealand imported, farmed. I think there's a place for UK farm and park. There's also European wild venison coming in, which is a totally different standard. So the standards, though, through BQWV or through, I guess, your standard, is they are checked every year. The local authority have been out to my premises, I think, twice in the last 20. So there's no check on that at all. And that's what scares you, son.
Well, I just wanted to put a positive note in this as well, which is there's a wind of foot and there's a wind of change of foot. And when we have conference and convention clients come to us contractually, now there's a kind of an ecological questionnaire that we have to fill out. And they want to know what the carbon footprint is of our business. And have any of you seen the Celtic Manor as you go to Wales? It's a big operation, right? It's huge. What do you think the largest contributor to our carbon footprint is in that huge facility? Now, I'd have thought, as a director, because I see the bill, it's energy, it's electricity, it's actually beef. It's actually the amount of beef that we serve. If we can change the narrative to a more wild food, I think it's just, you get a feeling time in life is everything. And we've got a window of opportunity here to push wild food.
So just on the back of that, I've just to show you basically how, as you said, there is sort of change afoot. Over the last sort of 2-3 years, we've been doing a lot of work on getting big catering companies to basically swap out some of their beef to venison. Has a lower carbon footprint. So what they're looking at, and it's quite simply what they think, because they work a numbers game, is they sort of look at it and they say, right, okay, we need to basically cut off our carbon footprint in our food. So if we have 20 standardized recipes for beef, if we can take 10 of those and swap them out for venison, we cut our carbon footprint down by 50%. That's the way they look at it. That's just numbers that they're basically looking at. And again, when we're trying to basically put product into them, is it convincing them to basically take wild venison? Now, a few people have asked me, and I'll throw this out there, because a few people have asked me and said, well, it's about time that we started in supermarkets basically labeling everything with species. We can't do that. Because the problem is that basically with species is that once we start labeling it as species, we have seasons here where we cannot get venison. And I desperately do not want England to go down the track that basically Scotland's going down, where we're shooting animals out of season, right? And so therefore we have to be able to basically serve supermarkets and serve people with venison, unless we're going down the restaurant chains. With the restaurant chains, yes, they should know what the animals are, and it should be put onto the menu as to basically what certain species are. But when you're serving supermarket sort of diced venison, where you're serving them basically venison mince, depending on what their regulations are, right, we could give them venison, and that's basically how it needs to say to be able to give them the right amount. We've also had, and when we're talking about catering companies that have done this, basically that have swapped out the beef, there's been people like Compass, Sodexo is starting to do it now, the NHS is starting to do it, Basically, all those sorts of companies are basically looking at that for that message of basically what's behind it. And we've done work towards that. We work with other catering companies now. We've got CH&Co, which we're working with. And through Simon and Tristan, what we've done is basically, because they sponsor the college, we are open to working with them and bringing in the people that they want to teach about venison and about the background of venison, the whole story of venison, and doing demonstrations for those chefs to basically re-educate them and give the understanding about your carcass utilization, because that is a big problem with carcass utilizations. I hate the fact the majority of chefs can look no further than the 2 loins that are on the back of a venison, back of a deer. Yeah, apparently, yeah, that's the only thing that exists on the deer with most chefs. And what we've tried to do, especially where I've worked with them, I'm working with the haunches of venison. I tend to basically use haunch of venison a heck of a lot. And we've proved that we can do dinners of 150, 200 people using the haunch muscles, right? And basically trimming them, yeah, and cooking them in a way that they're actually better than the loin. You know, it's not just look at the loin. The other thing one of my pet hates is when chefs call the loins fillets. I cannot stand that. And it's basically really bad terminology in the fact that basically those people understand it. When I did National Chef of the Year, which is the biggest competition that you can do in this country for chefs, in National Chef of the Year, we had 75 entries. Out of 75 entries, 72 of them used venison fillet. Now, it annoyed me that much that on the day I said, let's give them venison fillets. I want to see what they can do with a venison fillet. Yeah, if they ordered 2 venison fillets, let's give them 2 puny little venison fillets. And when they get there, well, have a heart attack because basically it's not what they've ordered. But I then did a venison masterclass with the finalists. And when I did the venison masterclass, I told them this, your terminology is all wrong. You've got to understand that these are not fillets. The other thing I hate is sirloin of venison. There is no bloody such thing as a sirloin of venison. Yeah. But yeah, that education on our side. And we work with these guys. We've done some work with Highland Game as well, basically educating guys about the utilization of product. And we're, if you like, we're a hub to do that work because obviously we understand the product and we have the equipment to be able to do that. And we're open to doing it. Yeah, we're open to doing that work and bringing as many people as you like, sit them down, give them lunch, show them stuff and educate so that then those chefs can go away and basically be able to have a good supplier, then supply them with the product that then their chefs can be innovative with. Most of the time, it's about showing their chefs how to use it. And it's not showing them recipes because what these guys are, you're teaching them to suck eggs. They know how to cook. It's just a case of educating them what parts of the animal, how to use it. You know, that's also.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm a sheep farmer. I'm a deer stalker. I also own a deer park, and I retail all my own venison. The thing that attracted me into venison production is that I can be a producer retailer. I can do the whole thing myself, which obviously I can't do with my sheep and my other livestock. Which is why I was not at all keen on the British Quality Wild Venison Insurance thing, because it relied on carcasses going through an AGHE, and I'm very keen on the Open Food Network, but that's by the by. And I 100% sympathise with the game dealers though, because I get sick to death of stalkers complaining about the price they get for carcasses, because they're using game dealers as a disposal service. It's shocking. I've seen people shooting 2 deer and they keep the good one for themselves, and they look at the poor one with all the shot holes in and say, oh, that's one for the dealer. So I really think stalkers have got to up their game. I think the standard of carcasses that are being produced on the whole is pretty poor. It's shocking. Whether it's shot placement or whether it's growlicking standards or whether it's carcass handling from the field to the larder. Unless we as stalkers really up our game, we can never go to the game dealers or to the customers and say, we're producing a consistent product, we want you to pay for it. Now, Nick's touched on the pride aspect of, his pride in his job that makes all his carcasses nice and consistent in the larder. But a lot of people don't seem to have that pride. They seem to be just churning out carcasses that are frankly awful. How can we as an industry, with the support of the guys up there as well, the BDS and so on, how can we really get the message through to the stalkers
Whether it's not necessarily training that's needed, because people know in the bottom of their heart what these carcasses should look like. And they know they shouldn't be dragging them through leaf litter and chucking in the back of the pickup with all the rubbish and so on. They know that in the bottom of their heart. So it's not training people need, but how can we as an industry actually open the eyes of stalkers and make them realise that a carcass like that is just not good enough? Whether you're selling direct to the customer as I do, and as I say, you know, for me, that's the whole beauty of venison. That's the whole thing that makes me love the whole deer industry, is that I can shoot the animal, I can manage its ecosystem by controlling the population, I can then process it myself and put a quality product in front of my customers. But how can we really get all the stalkers on board to start thinking of that animal as food from before they even pull the trigger? What is the incentive we can use? Because it's not just going to be higher prices. There's got to be something that engenders that pride, that makes people think, yeah, that's real quality. That's not just a dead animal because I had to kill it. What can we use as our incentive to get that?
Hello. Right, Tim, hear what you're saying. We've already made that first step because we're all sat here, we're all listening to this. So this is a good first start. We need to make sure that we all promote venison in a great way. We all need to be doing our social media. We also need to call them people who aren't doing it as good as they could be doing it. We need to actually pull them up on it and say, look, fella, you know, I saw your Facebook post and that's pretty grim. You shouldn't be doing that, let alone putting it on Facebook. So can you give us some examples of from a game dealer's point of view? What's the worst you're getting? But you must get some really good guys as well.
Yeah, I prefer to focus on the good stuff, to be honest with you. Yeah, inevitably we get some rubbish and we have to have a home for it. Yeah, obviously it costs you once you start disposing of things that get dropped off at the door. We pay the same all the way through. We don't tell people to do headshots or chest shots or anything else. So as long as the saddle is okay, we will take the venison at that price, because we're not encouraging people to take a shot that might not be confident with and all the rest of it.
But the question the audience member asked was, should you be subsidising potentially a good shot carcass compared to that of a poorly shot carcass? Would that generate more quality game rather than maybe substandard game, e.g. a head and neck shot over a chest shot?
Potentially, but just the ethics of potentially taking a headshot, because it might be worth that's kind of like where we draw the line. So we do pay the same all the way through. Potentially, but it's just ethical.
Is a question that perhaps you need to reject more when people drop it off? And I mean, is that, you know, people need to learn, and the only way they're going to learn is by not being able to find an outlet.
Yeah, absolutely. If it's unusable, then it will be rejected, of course.
And even if elements of it are usable, it's just to turn around and point out to the person, sorry for this, and this. Yeah, we can use a bit of it, but it's going to cost us to dispose of 2/3 of the carcass. So we're not going to pay you anything for it, but you can leave it here.
Yeah, the most of the value in the deer is in the saddle, so that is the first inspection, obviously, and the rest of it we deal with it appropriately. But yeah, I mean, we're dealing with a lot of deer, so we've got to do a lot of inspections. You know, the guys are very busy, so we have to just set a rule somewhere, and that's it. No, I don't think so. I think if we're collecting from a larder, we know where it's coming from, and you know, we won't be. If there's something horrendous, then people know not to present it to us.
I think we got time for one more question.
So the audience member was asking here about maybe what we should be doing through the Deer Network is connecting more stalkers so that the end user can kind of actually chat to the person that potentially shot the deer and all the rest of it. Therefore, say they've got a venison haunch and it's really delicious, and that person then can get in touch with the guy that took the deer and say, thank you ever so much, I really enjoyed that.
Can I just say, Jesse, that I've recently come from abroad, basically working in Portugal, and also I've been working in Czech Republic and places like that. If you think that we have a problem, yeah, we don't have any problem. All right? Because anybody being on a driven shoot, yeah, driven shoot, yeah, Monteria. If you look at the way a carcass is basically worked in a Monteria, when the animals are shot, but sort of like, I don't know, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock in the morning, they're not particularly basically bothered about where they've been shot. And then it's sort of like 28 degrees and the animals are just basically sitting there with their guts in. And then about 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, they're all sitting there still with their guts in, or their guts half hanging out. And they're presented for the photographs. And then sort of like 5:30, 6 o'clock, a vet turns up, they grollock them, and he actually bloody stamps them fit for human consumption. And we think we've got a problem. In actual fact, the work I've been doing out in Portugal, they've been looking at us because they think our standards are incredible in comparison to basically what they are. In actual fact, the estate that I'm working with at the moment, they've actually gone completely away from Monteria, right through now to all stalked animals, and basically animals that are put through the carcass, through the chiller chain, the corrective cuts, basically chiller chain from the moment basically animals are within half an hour of the animal being shot, it's collected, and within 90 minutes it's in the chiller. And all of this has been set up, and everybody else in Portugal is looking at them going, these guys are doing a great job, they're brilliant. And we're just doing pretty much the minimum standards that we have here in the UK. I've taken what is the DCS out there, and I've basically tried to train people with it out there. Now, like I said, I mean, like, we're all complaining about headshot, chest shot, whether a carcass is, whether a carcass is out there. They take all of them, it'd be perfect venison. They'll be getting the same price, and everybody be paying fantastic. And they're all happy with it. And we would not even eat that. Can you imagine basically taking out, shooting an animal, basically losing it first thing in the morning and finding it in the afternoon? How many of you would put that through a larder? No one. We just wouldn't.
So the audience member states here that after Jose was speaking about Monterias, that if you were on a forestry cull or a deer cull, maybe down south, I don't know, the fallow or something like that, and you're up a high seat and you shot one early, first light, that deer could lie there because you're not allowed to get down from the high seat. And potentially that deer could be there for up to 6 hours, still with its guts in. And obviously it was just basically trying to cover the same point that it does happen within the UK or within forestry areas.
Yeah, but we're all saying that's wrong. So basically, if anything, those companies are the companies basically that shouldn't be basically getting paid any premium for their products. And if anything, those companies should be scrutinised about what they're doing.
I think I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap it up there. We've, I think, only hit the thin end of the wedge on this rather topical discussion. But I think we can all, when we talk about imports of venison coming from New Zealand deer farms, but the takeaway is, well, there's clearly a demand for it. People are eating venison. What we need to do is work out, well, what do we need to do to replace wild venison with farm venison coming from New Zealand? And what comes consistently through all this is standards. And we've all got to keep lifting our standards and not rest on our laurels. It's great to hear, we looked at exemplars, but we can all come up with plenty of examples where we aren't exemplars and we've got to do better. But I'd just like to thank all of my panel. Thank you very much for coming along. All of you for your input today, listening. And please do, if you feel compelled to do it, sign up to the Open Food Network. Because I think this is a great initiative. But thank you all very much indeed for coming. And just to add in, obviously no one's going to be allowed to leave this room unless you're a BDS member. But that's not a joke. I mean that. But thanks, everyone.
Yet again, I apologise for the audio. It was a struggle to get that recorded and actually reduce the background noise of a very, very busy show. But we did manage to get it there, and hopefully it has been an interesting topic for you. If it has raised any questions, you can get in touch with me at peter@theoutdoorgibbon.com, or you can contact the BDS and fire those questions over to them. But yes, venison is certainly a hot topic. How can we get it more mainstream? Can we get it more mainstream? Are the stalkers being looked after? Are the game dealers giving us the best deal? How do we do all of this? So if there is things to talk about, please come back to us. Anyway, these were two very special recordings just done for the BDS at the 2025 Stalking Show. So hopefully you've enjoyed those, and it probably has raised a few topics. But anyway, please listen to the rest of the back catalogue of the Outdoor Gibbon podcast if you've enjoyed this. Subscribe. There's always new topics coming up, and we will probably dig deeper into these two podcasts and see if we can answer some of those questions for you that you may not have even thought about. Anyway, we'll catch you on the next one.